So, here in the UK, incidents of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism have spiked in the 3 weeks since the Hamas atrocities.
The Community Security Trust recorded at least 805 anti-Semitic incidents. Can we call them what they are? Jew-hating, between the 7th and 27th of October, the highest ever in a 3-week period. That's
right. So joining us now for more is the author, Dov Forman. Good morning, Dov. I think Andrew makes a really good point there. We talk about anti-Semitism, but some people, especially younger people, may not know what that actually means. Is it important that we call a spade and we say this is about anti-Jewish sentiment?
Yes, I think so many people, because of the way that we call it anti-Semitism, don't realise that this is, like every other form of racism, just pure racism against Jewish people, hatred against the Jewish people for being Jewish. And we've seen this throughout history. Anti-Semitism is a virus which has consistently and continuously mutated itself in different forms. They used to hate us because supposedly we were powerful and rich, and then they used to hate us because we were communist, and then they used to hate us because we were on the right. And throughout history, this has mutated, and at the moment we're seeing it rise because of what's going on in Israel. And consistently we've seen when there's any violence or an increase in tensions between Gaza and Israel, we've seen people use that as a pretext on the streets here in the United Kingdom to be anti-Jewish, to be racist against Jewish people, and to increase this anti-Jewish sentiment.
Dov, you've been a very active campaigner against Jew-hating, and you and your great-grandmother, who is a survivor of the Holocaust, have been subjected to especially vicious insults, racist attacks in the last few weeks. Can you share some of them?
Yes, unfortunately, as you say, my great-grandmother and I have received hundreds, if not thousands, of anti-Semitic comments every single day. We have over 2 million followers on social media. And every morning I wake up to messages such as the following: good morning. And at least they start with good morning. And then they say, I hope that what happened on October 7th happens to your great-grandmother and is repeated to her. I hope she gets bombed. She's a dirty Zionist. They say the same about me. Sometimes they say, and some of the things I can't even repeat on air, but sometimes they say that the Holocaust is not a Holocaust, it was a holohoax. They often say that she's a liar, and that she and other Holocaust survivors, especially those in Israel, should be murdered, and that they know where we live and that they're going to come for us. And these are incredibly scary.
Dov, can I ask a question? Are they always from Muslims? Is it always Arab because of the hate and the division that's been caused in the Middle East? Is that predominantly where the hate is coming from?
No, I think especially on social media, what we're seeing these are people from all faiths, all ethnicities, from all countries, really, not just here in the UK, but I receive hate from people in America, people across Europe, people even in the Middle East, of course, reaching out. And these are young people who just don't understand the situation. They're naive. They've been manipulated through disinformation and through anti-Semitism that they've been subject to on social media. And that's why social media companies do have an important part to play here. Yesterday, I met with TikTok UK to suggest that they have some sort of program in place to combat this misinformation, this miseducation which is going on amongst our youth. And I think it's simple to understand why I'm currently sat at my university in University College London, where there's been terrible anti-Semitism over the past few weeks, both from students and from lecturers. And I think it's simple to understand why those students who are the same age as me feel this anti-Semitism, no matter if they're connected to this conflict or not. And that's because we've seen so much disinformation, so much anti-Semitism and hatred spread on social media.
How long is it going to be before these tech giants are brought to heel? Because no radio station, TV station, newspaper, magazine or publication could survive if they allowed any of this filth and hatred on both sides of the argument, the Islamophobia as well as the anti-Semitism. How long can it go on?
Well, firstly, I think you say that no TV channel could be allowed to do that. I think we've seen from the BBC, and I will say this because I feel very strongly about this, the BBC refused to call Hamas terrorists in the first few days. They were calling them militants, and they were allowed to do that. No one held them to account. I mean, eventually the government started to call on them, former culture secretaries, to call them terrorists. But in the first few days, that led to more anti-Jewish sentiment on the streets. I saw a direct correlation in the anti-Semitism that I was receiving the day after the BBC kept their report up for hours, claiming that the Israelis had hit the hospital in Gaza, which wasn't true at the time. And so actually you say that TV and news wouldn't be allowed to, but clearly they were. But even so, I think the question that you ask about when social media companies, when the tech giants will be held to account, I'm not sure they ever will, because these are people who have so much power in the sense that And also the law, by the way, doesn't really cover them. I mean, I met with the second gentleman of the United States, the husband of the vice president, yesterday, and he said that he's looking into amending some of the laws to see how in the US they can hold these tech giants to account. But I'm not really sure what the way forward is.
Do you feel, Dov, that in the last sort of, let's say, 50 years or so, that anti-Semitism had started to decline, particularly, let's just talk about this country, in Great Britain, and now you've seen a spike in recent times, and can you work out what that is related to?
I think that people have allowed anti-Semitism to maintain its level without kind of calling it out. And people, as we said at the beginning of this interview, people see anti-Semitism differently. And it's, as David Baddiel said in his book, because Jews don't count. People see Jews as powerful and rich people who have friends in governments, which all isn't true. We're just like any other minority. We are less than 1% of the population. And so people have allowed this to go unchecked. And as I say, we've had incredible support, especially at the moment, from the government, from the opposition. But people have allowed this to maintain its level without calling it out, and without calling it out at the same level as they have done with other forms of racism. And I will say this as well, because I think it's important, that we've seen so many on the left at the moment stay silent. All these groups which apparently stand up for social justice. And at the moment, we see them staying silent as anti-Semitism surges on our street, as tens of thousands of people go out every week and make London a no-go zone for Jews like myself. And there are tens of thousands of people. Not everyone on these marches are calling for an intifada of violence, but many of them are. And it's scary to be a Jew, especially on a Saturday at the moment in London.
Dov, thank you for that. That's Dov Forman.
Really brilliantly and articulately put, Dov. Thank you so much for joining us.
2 minutes. And Carole, we've got Carole Malone and Emma Woolf here. The Prime Minister today is seeing Elon Musk for a chat after the summit. He should raise with him what goes on Twitter, which is a cesspit of hatred and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well.
It completely is, and I mean, I just want to take us from the point that Dov raised there, because, you know, well, in fact, it was Bev's question. You said, have we seen an upsurge in anti-Semitism of late? If you remember 2 years ago when Starmer was first elected as leader, and he started to kick out all the anti-Semites, we regarded Corbyn and that mob as scum. We called them scum because we believed them to be anti-Semitic. And yet now, just 2 short years later, anti-Semitism on our streets has become normalised. And it's become normalised for lots of reasons. One, because the police have stood idly by for the last 3 Saturdays and allowed these pro-Palestinian mobs to chant jihad and Allahu Akbar and all this stuff. This is inciting violence against Jews. And, you know, Dov just said that he has seen an upsurge in violence against Jews, you know, since all this started. And I just think, you know, our cops have contributed to this by doing nothing. You know, you've got Mark Rowley, the guy who said he was going to reform the Met Police, moaning that he doesn't have enough laws to deal with this. Yes, he does. He's just not using them, because there are certain religions in this country and certain peoples who British law does not apply to, are not allowed to upset them in case they get upset. And that can't be the case anymore. We have to tackle this hatred, because it's only going to get worse. Anti-Semitism is now, I've noticed in 3 weeks, our country has changed out of all recognition in just 3 weeks. And it's going to get worse. And, you know, why are we allowing these protests? Because they're not peaceful protests, they're hate protests. Why are we allowing them when countries like France have just outlawed them and said it can't happen? And you know why? Because we've got cops who couldn't handle a dust-up on the streets. They don't know what to do. They don't have the manpower, and they don't have the guts, I think, to take these people on. They don't want to, and yet they should.
And we shouldn't blame the rank and file, because they're following orders, aren't they?
I think it's more than that. I think it's more than the police not wanting to get involved, not wanting. I think it's this desperate desire not to offend that we can't just call a spade a spade. I think Bev made a brilliant point at the beginning with Dov, saying this should be called anti-Jewish sentiment, because I think many, especially young people,
it's Jew-hating.
It's a complicated situation. A lot of people don't understand the difference, for example, between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But when we call it anti-Jewish sentiment or Jew-hating, which I
well, that's what it is.
It's a terrible phrase, it's a terrible phrase, and I think that was
true, Andrew. But you're right, Carole. This central London, just now in central London, I saw an Orthodox Jew with his young boy, both wearing their long black coats. And I thought to myself, without thinking about it, I thought, how brave they are, how brave to be wearing their Jewish garb. And why am I thinking that in 2023? Why are we feeling that someone is brave for walking through the streets?
There was a poll this week
that to be visibly a Jew.
In fact, Julie Burchill wrote a piece this week, and she said that there had been a poll that said the biggest anti-Jewish sentiment is among 18 to 34-year-olds, which I found astonishing to believe. But, you know, when you think about it, I mean, Douglas Murray wrote this week, he said, you know, there are times when you wonder how history happened, and then something happens and you realise why it happens, and that's exactly what's happening on our streets.
But they would call themselves anti-Semites, they would call themselves passionate supporters of Palestine.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that they can feel they're on the side of the right.
No historical wrong re-Palestine can be justified by hurting Jews today, by abusing them, by threatening them, by terrorising them.
And what were they doing, protesting, 500 of them, outside a Marks and Spencer store? Because the company was founded by a Jewish family. How deeply offensive is that?
And what are they
worrying
doing?
for the staff.
This is only going to get worse. We've got Remembrance Sunday coming up. We've got Commemoration Weekend. This is only going to get worse.
And there's a big march on the 11th. November the 11th, there's a big march.
People who gave their lives for our country, and our monuments are going to be desecrated. The cenotaph is going to be... This is appalling. This is an appalling situation.
Did you hear this week? There's a story about Net-a-Porter. I mean, you probably don't know what it is, but it's the girls will. It's an online luxury clothing company, and it banned a girl, one of their designers called Dodo Bar-All. She's Jewish, and they banned her for saying Hamas equals ISIS. Now, we know she's completely right. And you know, the FBI boss, Christopher Wray, said this week, he just said, Hamas is the worst threat to the world since ISIS. And yet this girl says it, she's Jewish, and she's dumped from this website on the day that she said it.
Boycott the website.
And you know, the irony of it was that they did this to this Jewish designer, who was brilliant, by the way. She does a clothing line called My Teresa. They did it, ironically, on the day that the young tattoo artist, it was revealed, this is the girl who was stripped and raped and paraded through the streets. And on that day, we discovered that they'd also beheaded her at the end of it. So stupid Net-a-Porter and this ridiculous virtue signalling it was doing. And how many other companies are going to do the same thing? You know, on the same day we hear about this girl's terrible end. It's not on, and we should all boycott companies that boycott Jewish people and not who take a stand against Jewish people because they're Jewish.
But I think more seriously, I think that the government and the police need to get control of the situation, because the tension, yes, on social media, but also on the streets, you know, on and off the streets, it's becoming very unpleasant. And Central London is actually a no-go area, and I live in Central London. A no-go area at weekends. I mean, I was in Waterloo the other day, and it was horrible to be caught up in, to be anywhere near it.
I was saying the weekend when there was the big march, 3 young men got on the tube. They'd been at the Palestinian demonstration. They had the Palestinian flags wrapped around their faces, so they were covered, and they were shouting in the carriage, "Who here is Israeli?
You are kidding. You are
Jewish?"
kidding.
Absolutely.
Where's the British
Transport Police when you need them? But was I courageous enough to take them on?
No,
I'm afraid I wasn't.
But you can't.
3 of them, probably in their 20s.
Individuals can't sort of stand up to that.
And so what did I do? I got out of the next carriage.
The police are in such a difficult position, though, aren't they, at the moment with this? I do think it is difficult, because what they're effectively trying to do at the moment is not to inflame tensions. They're keeping 2 very entrenched communities happy. They're trying to...
I think they're not keeping either.
No, they're not.
But they're not. But their aim is to pacify rather than inflame tensions. But at what point is that going to change? Because if events in the Middle East start to escalate, which they probably will, they don't show any signs at the moment of looking... Nobody's calling for a ceasefire. Then what happens here?
The cops have taken a side already. The other Saturday, there was a Jewish march planned in a part of North London, and the police told them to cancel it because it would be perceived as anti-Muslim. So Jewish people had to cancel their march, but the other one is allowed to go ahead.
They've taken thousands marching through Central London.
500,000.
But it isn't as balanced this time.
Isn't.
I'm afraid we all know which side the police are coming down.
And as Dov Forman made the point, the Jewish population in this country is minuscule.
I also want us to still live in a country where you can protest.
Of course.
We cannot. We must be really careful.
Who can protest?
Well, exactly.
Terrorist sympathisers can protest?
This is inciting...
But not chanting jihad, which is inciting holy war. That should be...
Those 2 women, you know those 2 women we saw who had the paraglider photographs? Yes, they've been charged, but they won't go to court until 2025. What kind of justice is that for Jewish people who are watching that and saying, OK, that's how they feel about us? That's the kind of steps they're prepared to take. Get someone caught in a year and a half time, 2 years' time.
Do you feel feel like, all of us here, do you feel like we had any understanding of the anti-Semitism that was existing in this country before this? I didn't, Emma. I wasn't aware of it at all.
Well, I think when we saw the Equality and Human Rights Commission reporting to us anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that was jaw-dropping, because it said it was institutionalised in the Labour Party.
But that's what I mean.
In the party of the left.
Well, look at Andy MacDonald the other day, when up Mount March, when he made that speech.
MP, yeah.
The Labour MP East for Middlesbrough, when he stood up there, and you should have heard the hate in his voice. It was disgusting. And Keir Starmer took a full 24 hours to suspend him. Yeah. He was backed up by John McDonnell. These are the people who were around 2 years ago, who were showing their colours.
Who Keir Starmer was working with in the shadow cabinet.
Oh, completely. I mean, completely. But Starmer is in a state now because more than half of his MPs are calling for a ceasefire.